Forget the day that news began to spread like wildfire all throughout the seminary that 3 of the guys were stuck in the elevator. By the time I heard the news, they had already been held captive by it for over an hour and a half. And by the time it was all said and done, when the technician came and was able to get them out and set them free, they had been blessed with the opportunity to have spent over 2.5 hours of quality bonding time together. Now, of course, what made the event more memorable was when I was able to get the inside scoop from one of the guys that had been imprisoned on that elevator. When I asked him what happened, he got this sheepish smile on his face, and he looked down to avoid embarrassment, and he quietly proclaimed, "It's not a good idea for 3 guys to jump at the same time while inside of a moving elevator." I finished giving him a hard time about this, and then I said, "Well, what did you do during your time in captivity?" And he said, well, at first that they were pretty freaked out. Then they calmed down and assured each other it would probably only be a few minutes and everything would be all right. But then as time went on, they began to get impatient, frustrated, angry, and nauseous. And that last description caught me by surprise. So when I asked why they were nauseous, he said, well, that they had just come inside from playing football in the rain. So after about 15 minutes, it began to smell really, really bad inside of that elevator. So there they were stuck, and he said they kept grumbling about all kinds of things. They grumbled about the inconvenience, about the smell, about the work that they should have been getting done during that time, about the smell, about the fact that they had meetings that they had to get to but were going to miss, about the way they were all pointing fingers and blaming each other as to whose fault it was, and about the smell. So to sum up their imprisonment, they were frustrated, stressed, upset, and as a result, they had an incredibly miserable experience that day. Now, we just heard in our gospel about a man who was in a much worse situation because he literally was imprisoned, right? We were told that when John the Baptist heard in prison of the works of Christ, he sent his disciples to Jesus with this question: "Are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" I think it's so important to take note of the fact this happened when John was in prison. I will say, I think if I were in prison, or even if I were simply trapped in an elevator, I would do exactly what my friends did. I would complain, I would grumble, and most of all, I would simply focus on my struggles and my difficulties and dwell on how those problems were going to affect my life and my plans. Maybe I'd even give up hope. But that's not what John the Baptist did. His whole mission in life was to find the Messiah and lead others to Christ. And today's gospel shows us that when he was in prison and things didn't go his way, he did not let his circumstances get in the way of being who he was and what he was called to do. So even though he couldn't go out, he tried to figure something else out. And he sent his disciples to continue to accomplish his goal. And Christ told John's followers to report back what they heard and saw. The blind are regaining their sight. The crippled are walking. Lepers are cleansed. Deaf are starting to hear. The dead are raised, and the poor are hearing a message of hope. Imagine the joy that John would have experienced when they delivered this message back to him from Jesus. But think about this. If John had given up hope or lost some of his desire to follow God because of the obstacles that had come in the way of his plans, if he had given up, then he never would have received that message of hope that Christ was longing to give him. My dear brothers and sisters, the same thing is true for each of us today. Frequently, life doesn't go the way that we plan. We might encounter difficulties at work. Maybe there's financial stress at home. Maybe we even find ourselves enduring struggles in our most important relationships with family or friends. And I think a lot of the time we might expect for these issues to, kind of go away after a little bit. Just like my friends thought their elevator mishap would only result in being stuck for a few minutes or so. But then there's other times in life where it goes a lot longer, where we feel stuck, trapped, or maybe even imprisoned by the circumstances that seem to hold our lives and our happiness captive. And when this happens, the easiest thing to do is to complain or to grumble or become impatient with those involved. Perhaps even to become impatient with God. We might even begin to make comments about the smell, saying, "My life stinks." It's so easy to fall into this trap when our life seems stuck. But it doesn't need to be this way. In the very midst of our imprisonment, we need to focus outward and zone in on what Christ still has to offer. We have to look beyond our own cell and ask Christ to allow us to hear and to see, maybe even smell the beautiful things that he's doing in the world and in our lives. John the Baptist found the strength to endure his situation because he knew that the deepest truth of life, the reality that was even more real than his circumstances, was the fact that God is present in the world and that God's loving presence guides each and every situation in our lives. This is true for all of us today. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, am I open to looking for God's hand right in the middle of my struggle? Or do I simply focus and dwell on the struggles and the hardships themselves? God is present all around us. And if we take time to pray and ask him to reveal to us where he is, we will see him acting in our lives. But do we take time to relax, to settle down, to try to put our worries aside and ask God to show us where it is that he's present? Right here and right now at this very Mass, Christ is going to come down upon this altar simply because he loves you and he wants to dwell with you. He wants to abide within you even in the midst of whatever struggles you might be enduring. So sure, maybe your life kind of stinks right now. Maybe you feel like you're essentially trapped in an elevator with 3 wet, sweaty, and smelly guys. And if you are, then it's okay, and you'll get through it. So long as you remember that Christ is with you there too. Take a moment to look around and see the works of God. Allow him to give you hope, and allow his presence to give you peace even in the midst of your captivity. And most of all, always remember 3 things: that God never leaves us, that his love never fails, and never jump while riding an elevator.